The past in antiquity is always brought to life in modern literature and movies. A time that gave rise to Lord of the Rings, where all types of races and species of human and hominid beings flourished or waged war on one another. These stories we hear about today come from a not-so-distant past in the oral and written histories of cultures all around the world. Even accounts of these beings still roaming the forests and hills presently. These oral traditions are normally written off as a fanciful embellishment of a story passed down and added upon from one generation to another. However, in our increased knowledge and advancements in what we understand of the world, its history and geology, the oral stories that yesterday seemed unimaginable today align with new discovery and research. If science of geology and cataclysmic events are marrying up to oral traditions, then perhaps it's time to look into what else the oral traditions are saying more seriously. The legend we will examine now is derived from the Utes and takes place in southwestern Colorado and northwestern New Mexico. This is an ancient tale of a race of little people and the great calamities affecting the North American continent, mass migrations, and a new world forming. The legend is short, but within it, very crucial information is presented that paints a story with enough clues to cross-reference geological events that match the description in the legend. This is an initial examination, but what it suggests is that the little hominins are real. Huge calamities occurred which forced entire groups of people to be displaced, and in their desperation, also displaced the little people. Let's start by reading the oral story itself, read from the book, A Guidebook to the Colorado, by Eugene Parsons, written in 1911.
The Utes have interesting traditions respecting the faraway past of the Rocky Mountain country, which had been their habitat for ages. Once upon a time, as the legend runs, there was an immense warm lake northeast of Big River, now known as the Colorado River. And near its shores lived the remote forefathers of the tribe. Huge fish abound in this lake, and serpents as long as 100 lodgepoles. The climate was hot, and the land brought forth big trees. There were big deer and gigantic oxen with white horns. One day, the oxen began to roar together, and such a cloud of steam rose from the nostrils that the sun was obscured. The earth reeled, and the sky fell. The waters continued to fall for 3 moons, and by that time the lake was drained away through the Grand Canyon of the Colorado. The deer and oxen strayed eastward into the mountains and were slain by the Ute hunters. Then came the flood that formed the Green River Canyon. A race of little people, almost white, arrived on the scene in skin canoes. They built stone houses in the cliffs, raised corn, beans, squash, and pumpkins. They had plenty of silver, gold, and iron tools. Afterward, Big Red Indians from the northwest came and drove off the little people, who went south. These red men were the ancestors of the Apaches, Navajo, and Kiowas. Then, melted rocks were poured out of the earth, making the land desolate.
This story is sparkling with bits of crucial information that has probably been passed down for thousands of years. We can see right away that multiple calamities were occurring that brought the little people down to the area and later other native groups. Let's break this down into my interpretations. I'd like everyone to remember that we don't have much to go on. However, some of my assessments could be tested and more research could paint a more accurate picture. I'm going to place this story at the end of the last ice age, a time when huge, shallow freshwater lakes covered most of our deserts. Imagine a paradise with constant water, vegetation, and megafauna. The ice trapped up north created a climate to dream of in Nevada, Utah, New Mexico, and southern Colorado. These huge lakes, taking up large portions of the states we know today, would have been a hub for much of the early inhabitants. In fact, this is why there are so many pictographs in these desert regions that are inhospitable today. The only remaining remnants of any of these great lakes are the Salt Lake in Utah and Pyramid Lake in Nevada. These Great Lakes can be traced back within the geological record, and most are well documented, and part of our understanding of the prehistoric world here in the Americas. The Big River referred in the story is identified as the Colorado River. However, most rivers were considered the Big River, so which river it was could be brought into question. If anyone has any information on prehistoric Ice Age lakes northeast of the Colorado River along any part of its course, let me know. There are lakes to the southeast of the river in New Mexico that may coincide with what happened next in the story, to what we know about the geology of the area. If this is not the area the story takes place, I do believe that what happened next may be explainable. We are told that there is an uproar of oxen that create a large stream that blots out the sun before the water is drained out over a 3-month period, which forces all the animals away from the area up to the mountains, where the Utes take advantage by hunting them. Then a massive flood occurs that is powerful enough to create the canyon through the mountains which the Green River flows through. Later, lava flowed out of the earth. Let's focus on the natural disasters occurring first. Imagine what would happen to the crust if a mile-high ice sheet that came down as low as southern Colorado suddenly started melting at a pace never before seen within the geological record. That weight difference would create huge pressure gaps and literally shift the crust, allowing magma to move to places it hadn't before in different parts of the country. This can actually be seen in southern Colorado, New Mexico, and Utah. Looking at the Geological Government Survey for New Mexico, we know that the most recent lava flows occurred around 10,900 years ago to as recent as 2,500 years ago. Now, what would happen if that magma started pushing up under one or multiple of these huge Ice Age lakes? One would expect that it would push up the surface and displace the water, forcing a drain on a magnitude that can only be fathomed in Hollywood movies. As the magma gets close to the surface and the fissures start developing along with lava starting to come to the surface, these large, shallow lakes would also start creating a huge amount of steam from the evaporation. All this can be seen taking place in New Mexico by its lava fields, near giant Ice Age lakes. The lake in question and volcanic activity may have been further up north between Utah and Colorado, but as evidence has shown in other parts of the continent, if massive floods from melting ice dams broke, allowing huge torrents of water to reshape the landscape, it may be harder to see on first glance, and require more specialized observation to find traces it even existed. However, this scenario fits well within what can be observed in New Mexico. The area is also where the Apache, Navajo, and Kiowa settled. Let's assume for a moment that I'm right on how the geology is tied into the oral histories, which made by the geology I just pointed out. What does that tell us about the rest of it? After this great calamity of both the lake draining and a huge flood, a race of little people arrives from the north, escaping what one can assume was the destruction of their homeland, in canoes made of skins nonetheless. This group of diminutive peoples had nothing short of advanced technology. If we are right about the time period around 12,000 years ago, even more incredible still, these people had iron tools. This would put them in the Iron Age during the Stone Age. The Americas were not thought to have ever reached the Iron Age until recently it was discovered that the Cahokia mound builders culture and Pacific Westerners indeed possessed iron tech made from meteorites. If this oral history is correct on these huge natural disasters taking place, then one has to ask, if this race of little people had advanced tech of iron tools, what other ancient peoples and tribes had it before their entire potential civilization became displaced by the destruction of North America? Not only that, these small people also are reported to build cliff dwellings. Some close ones would be the Mesa Verde, where the Anasazi once resided, by some interpretations known as the ancient enemy to the Navajo, which ironically, according to the story, are one of the tribes fleeing the north that forced the little people further south. The question has to be asked, are there cliff dwellings further south of these lava fields and lakes? The answer is yes, in New Mexico's Gila cliff dwellings. Once again, I'd like to remind everyone that this assessment started shaky, and now we have dived into inductive reasoning to tie a lot of this together. But the basis, I think, may hold truth. It requires more investigation and evidence, if the time frame being considered during the last ice age is to be accepted. Then I doubt the cliff dwellings we knew today are old enough. I would be curious to see if evidence ever is found to show that the cliff dwellings we are aware of now were built on top of much older ruins, as is customary and in our nature. Looking even further north to understand where the Apache and Navajo may have come from, and perhaps the flood that may have pushed them further south, we take a look at the Dene tribe that is part of the same language group as the Apache and Navajo. This may help support the Utes' oral legend. Hammerson Peters recounts their flood and migration story.
The following is an excerpt from Drum Songs, Glimpses of Dene History, a history of northern Canada's Dene peoples written by northern historian Kerry Abel, and published in 1993, 2007, and 2011 by the McGill Queen's University Press. Quote, "Probably the most widely known story throughout the North is the story of the Great Flood. While many versions are told, the most commonly repeated tells us that there was once a terrible winter in which much snow fell and everyone was miserably cold. The animals, determined to put an end to the winter, discovered 7 great bags that held different types of weather. It was the mouse who finally opened the bag of warmth, but the snow melted so fast that the earth was flooded, and all land was lost to sight. The animals huddled together on a raft, and one by one they attempted to dive to find the earth again. Different versions of the story credit different animals with the final success, but most report that it was the muskrat who at last returned from his dive with a handful of mud. The earth was rebuilt, the waters receded, and the world became as it is today. Most Dene groups also tell stories about how their people moved from one land to another. In fact, one of the most persistent themes in Dene oral tradition is the discussion of splits among population groups. Since many societies around the world have stories of migrations, folklorists have sometimes interpreted these as allegorical, or representative of deep-seated anxieties about separation from loved ones in a dangerous environment. In the case of the Dene, however, one can correlate unique elements in some of these stories to datable events in order to provide an understanding of what was probably the most important event of ancient Dene history. Using oral traditions, archaeological evidence, linguistic theories, and the geological record, one can argue that the ancestors of the Dene lived as a single people in the mountains of what is now the Yukon-Alaska borderlands, and that a catastrophic natural event precipitated their dispersal to the east, north, and south in search of new lands. Anthropologists and linguists since the late 19th century have accepted the fact that the Navajo and Apache are close relatives of the northern Dene. On the basis of language differences, the split between the groups is now believed to have occurred sometime between 500 and 800 AD. William B. Workman of the University of Alaska once proposed that this upheaval may have been caused by a major volcanic eruption in the St. Elias Range that occurred at about that time. Today, there is ample evidence available to support the fundamental idea that a volcanic eruption forced the Dene to seek new lands. In fact, 2 eruptions in the St. Elias Range would have affected many people living in the region. The volcano is now referred to as the White River Volcano, and geologists date its most recent eruptions at about 310 AD and 525 AD. The second eruption was the most devastating, since it produced an explosion of enormous violence, equal to or greater than any other volcanic eruption in the last 1,000 years of Earth history. Noxious gases are produced in an eruption of this type, while mudslides, heavy rainfalls of acid rain, and other related phenomena would have created havoc in areas surrounding the volcano. It is hardly surprising that such a devastating event would be commemorated in a people's history. What is surprising, perhaps, is that these stories would continue to be told for a period of almost 1,400 years. There are versions told by the Hare, Mountain, and Slavey, as well as stories with indirect references that might be interpreted as partial memories of the catastrophe. Father Emile Petito was the first to record stories with references to an exploding mountain. In 1869, one of the mountain people told him how people had once taken refuge on a mountain after a great flood, hoping to save themselves from future disasters. Instead, quote, "The ground which smoked around them caught fire, the rocks exploded, the mountain opened up, and out of it came an enormous fire. Then it exploded with a great fracas, and in its place there was nothing but a vast plain, smoking with debris," unquote. The people fled in terror in all directions, unable to understand one another because their language had changed, unquote.
Further research by Hammerson Peters has also revealed that some native groups claim many pictographs were created not by their ancestors but by a race of little people.
I found the following information in the 12th volume of the Handbook of North American Indians, which is dedicated to the study of the Plateau peoples. According to anthropologist Keo Borson In his article on rock art in the interior of North America's Pacific Northwest, many Indians questioned by anthropologists on the subject of the ancient pictographs that could be found here and there throughout their people's traditional territories, quote, claimed to have no knowledge of the meaning and function of rock art, or were reluctant to talk about it, unquote. On the Columbia River at Vantage and on the Natchez River near Yakima in Washington state, quote, the Wanapan people said rock art was made by the Little People, which were animal-like in appearance and inclined to the ways of evil spirits, unquote. According to anthropologist Jay Miller, the Salishan Indians of the Middle Columbia River in Washington state believed that, quote, the world was populated with various dwarves, dangers, and monsters, unquote. Ethnologist John Alvin Ross wrote that the Spokane Indians also had a belief in dwarves. According to ethnologist Theodore Stern, the Cayuse, Umatilla, and Walla Walla Indians of southwestern Washington and northwestern Oregon believed that, quote, within the present world, beings of preternatural form and power still reside. They include mountain elves, who formerly led mortals astray, and giants downriver who carried them off, unquote.
If you'd like to learn more about the oral traditions and the race of Little People, I strongly recommend watching Hammerson Peters' documentary titled Elves, Dwarves, Fairies, and Goblins in Canadian Settler Folklore. I'll add a link in the description below. We have no idea how close to the truth this examination got, but what it has shown is that oral traditions have a basis in reality and science can verify them in time. This examination needs a lot more data to support it. This is the first push to bring the ancient histories into reality and to recognize how incredible the human race is, and how it's had to survive along with all the other unknown species and intelligent beings we may have crossed paths with or still be living with side by side today. If you have any information that could help support or steer this interpretation in the right direction, don't hesitate to leave some feedback. Thank you, and remember to like, subscribe, and share.